thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I have great respect for you, but I must disagree with you strongly and rise in support of the ranking member's amendment. The original Competes legislation of 2007 was vital in that it recognized the need for Federal investment in the sciences and the positive impact it would have on our universities, businesses, and communities. It was bipartisan legislation that passed this committee and this Congress that based on the recognition that science was so important for our future. In 2010, Congress tries to reauthorize Competes legislation and reaffirmed this committee's commitment to American innovation and scientific leadership. But sadly, the underlying bill fails to live up to this promise of the original Competes legislation. Now, this is not something I think that's just one party. You're quite right when you say the President didn't ask for much either, but both the President and this committee could be wrong. The proposed legislation increases funding for FY 2014 and 2015 by less than 1.5% for both the NSA and NSF and NIST. That's less than inflation, nowhere near enough to take advantage of the incredible research opportunities that are before this country. This bill places unfair and unnecessary restrictions on the NSF by making sure funding is at a directorate level and by weakening the peer review process. Congress should not allow the scientific experts should not allow the scientific experts to be undermined by the micromanagement of members of Congress. Now, I cannot stress enough the importance of strong investment in scientific research and development in our nation's continued economic success. You brought Neil deGrasse Tyson last year. One of his quotes is, "When you stop innovating, you stop thinking about tomorrow, because there's no lure of having to wonder how you might invent a tomorrow that you just dreamed up, because people stop dreaming. When you do that, when you stop dreaming and you stop innovating, you're basically coasting. When you're coasting, you eventually slow down and stop." America can't afford to stop. But even under the current levels of funding in scientific research, we are coasting. The United States still continues to lead the world in investment in scientific research and development, but other nations are catching up fast. China recently passed Japan as the second largest investor in research and technology. If we pass this bill and it becomes law, China will surely catch up. If you look through history, you will see that whether it was Rome or the British Empire, nations that value and promote innovation succeed. Those that do not find themselves captive to those that do. I am reminded of the great English chemist and physicist Michael Faraday. When I hear some of what you were saying, Mr. Chairman, about things that don't sound like they might be productive in science, he was the father of modern electromagnetism, and his inventions and experiments eventually led to everything we use today: motors, radio communication, radar, mass spectroscopy, power generation. But there was no way to know this at the time. No way to know that his playing with magnets, electricity, and a bunch of glass blocks would make modern life possible. If we pass this bill, we would be defunding our current Michael Faradays. We would be defunding our future. The reason why I am so much for this substitute amendment is because we must not allow, in the name of so-called fiscal responsibility, to send a message to our young potential scientists to stay away from science and innovation unless they want a career where they're going to be spending a life scrambling for funds. It's really a matter of our national defense and our economy. It's the wrong message to send, and it will cost us more for the nation in the long run than this bill saves. I yield back the balance.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to associate myself with the comments of the gentlewoman from Maryland. Look, your staff did a great job of researching some of these anecdotes, and they sound like very wasteful little programs, and who knows what they really were, and I'd love to know a little bit more about them. But the solution isn't to cut entire directorates. The solution isn't to cut behavioral sciences out completely. And all I can do is think about history. There are plenty of times when we looked at, say, theoretical physics and said, what in the world would black holes, would things like string theory would have to do with anything? Well, it was a theoretical physicist, Albert Einstein, that eventually led to the atom bomb. It was a theoretical physicist that eventually led to nuclear power and all these other things. At the time, it was considered silly, probably as silly at the time as some of the examples you give. And I'm very, very concerned about we in Congress making those determinations. If you want to make sure that there's not waste, empower the IGs more, maybe some of these other kinds of reforms, but don't just do this blanket cut, okay, we're smarter than the scientists, we're going to cut these directorates because they're not producing anything valuable. It is a recipe for disaster. I also wonder, look, I share with the sponsor of this amendment we'll say, a very critical attitude towards the People's Republic of China. But I am very concerned about what happens when we're following these levels and China surpasses us in research. Are we so confident that we're going to spend our money so much more wisely, that China's spending more money, that they won't develop better inventions than we will? And again, and I've heard the defense from that side of the aisle, oh, well, this is more than the President put on. So the President is wrong and you're wrong. If we care about the future of our country, we're not just going to be worried about the deficit. Yes, we have to worry about the deficit, but we have to worry even more, I feel, about the deficit in our science funding and making sure that we have the scientists and we're attracting the young people that are going to be able to make sure that we stay on top as a country. I yield back.
Okay, thank you.
But in its historical context, we may not be funding the science that leads to the next result. We cannot predict what's going to lead to the next result. Only scientists with peer review can come close to doing that, and they will be wrong, but at least eventually they will get there. My concern isn't that we're not funding string theory now. My concern is that in the past, if we had taken this same attitude, we wouldn't have funded all sorts of things that now lead to results. But there's no way to know that Michael Faraday playing with a bunch of magnets, that would have been the example. For the chairman of the science committee at the time, had it been there had been a science committee in Britain, would have said, oh, we're funding this crazy person. He's playing with a bunch of magnets. Isn't that a waste?
Yeah.
Well, then we should just throw away all of our iPhones and cell phones and airplanes and television sets and computers and everything else.
Obviously,
we cannot know, and we have to have some confidence in the scientific community and some freedom. You're always talking about freedom. Let them do it as long as they're properly inspected. And I agree with you, by the way. The NSF should be more for it.